Fiona,
Yes,
how cool is this world?
really cool, in my opinion, in my
We
humble
random
opinion.
we randomly met in South Africa
Yeah,
on a crazy journey, and we won't talk much about that crazy journey because we're trying to keep it under wraps.
exactly.
Um, and here we are connecting through podcast to get to know each other a little bit more and let people know about what you do and what we do, and having cool, amicable conversations and discussions about things that are happening germane to you, germane to me. So yeah.
Absolutely, and I'm really excited to get to have this conversation. It is really quite the coincidence that we met, and now we are here a few months down the line. But I'm always so open to connections and where they lead. So yeah, I'm excited, and thank you so much for welcoming me to your podcast.
Well, before we continue, I do a terrible job of introducing people. So, Fiona Tande, welcome to the Blood Origins podcast. You are out of Kenya. You're the
Yes, I am.
second lady that I'm talking to out of Kenya. I sent you
Okay.
the first podcast link of the first lady that I spoke to out of Kenya, right?
Right, right.
I
Yes, you
think this
did.
conversation will go a little differently than that first one.
Well, we'll see. But
Oh, man.
yes, so I am from Kenya. I'm a wildlife conservationist and a filmmaker. I primarily work in freelance, and I have organized the first and only wildlife conservation, nature, and environmental film festival, not only in Kenya, but on the African continent. And so I'm really open and looking to make connections and network with folks pertaining to conservation subjects and just seeing how we as storytellers can shape the narrative of what is happening on the African continent. And that's where you come in, because hunting is very much part of this very diverse continent.
So, Fiona, tell me a little bit about your. Okay, I'm getting a lot of feedback from you. I can hear myself. I know I've got echo cancellation on, but that's okay. That's okay. We'll. Do you have any headsets that you can put on?
Yeah, sure. Let me just grab them 1 second,
Let's see if we can
that's
put a
okay.
headset on. That'll make this conversation a lot easier.
Sounds good. Let me just grab them. Okay. Can you hear me?
Oh, that's good. That's perfect. Yeah. You don't put your hand down. Let's see if it sounds perfect. Talk
Okay.
now.
Can you hear me? Mic check.
Yeah, that's
1, 2,
perfect.
3.
That's perfect.
Awesome.
Sounds really good. Thank you. Now,
Sure
um,
thing.
so so tell me a little bit about the film festival. Has it happened already? I know you were talking about potentially doing it as an inaugural. We were going to talk. Obviously, this conversation is about what we're going to do the next time you do the film festival. Have you had one already?
Yes, so we've already had 3.
Oh,
Last year was
awesome.
the third one. We're having a bit of a change in how we're having this one. It's not going to be the main event. We're having a bit of auxiliary events and workshopping online, maybe master classes, and then hopefully come back on next year's 5th anniversary. So we've been on for quite some time.
That's amazing, man. And what the film festival's called, what?
Pridelands Wildlife Film Festival.
Pridelands Wildlands Film Festival. Amazing.
Pridelands Wildlife.
Oh, sorry, Pridelands Wildlife. Sorry, that's what happens when you get me at 5:30 in the morning. I can't remember things.
All good. Yeah.
Fiona, why did you start that? Why did you feel like you needed a film festival around wildlife conservation?
Right. So it goes back to, I guess, the whole reason I got into conservation in the first place. I really didn't have a lot of people whom I saw who looked like me in the conservation space. Being in Kenya, that's wild, but yes, it's a very closed rank space from what I experienced. So coming into that, I did see a lot of not a lot of local involvement, and then when I was pivoting towards filmmaking, the same was still happening. Again, Kenya being the wildlife hub of productions, you'd never see a lot of local talent being involved in that. So I got to attend a couple of festivals outside of the continent that were leaning towards wildlife and conservation, but couldn't really bottle that experience for people in Kenya. And so I figured, why not just start something that was a platform that I could have a lot of the filmmakers that are up and coming in this space be celebrated and showcase their work and just feel like part of a community.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Thank you.
Let me ask this question. This is the first controversial question of the podcast. Have you ever had anybody in the film festival that has produced something that is tied to hunting and wildlife conservation?
Not really. No, I haven't.
That's a very polite way of saying no, Robbie.
No, absolutely. But it is why I approached you, because it's definitely it's a topic that I've come across, and I do come from a country that is vehemently against hunting, but we'll get more into that in the podcast. But yeah, so I really wanted to have a better understanding of it. It's something that hunting took place, has taken place in Kenya for a long time, but controversially last year, we lost a couple of taskers to hunters. So it's a topic that I wanted to have addressed in a sober and safe space. So that's why I'm here.
Yeah, and look, I think that as we talked about it many times together, what we've prided ourselves in from a Blood Origins perspective, and as we move into we've actually built an additional non-profit behind Blood Origins, and I'm not going to release its name yet, but we are working in those sort of circles that's more tied to sustainable use of natural resources, in which we believe hunting, fishing, and most importantly, people are central to sustainable wildlife conservation for your kids, my kids, our grandkids one day. That we have to have opportunities and spaces specifically where intellectual, intelligent individuals like yourself and me can come together in a space and talk. And in the conversations we've had together, I'm not an evangelical wanting to convert you to being a pro-hunting advocate. All I want you to do is hear me for what I'm saying. And for you to probe me if you're like, that doesn't sound right. But also, on the other hand, going, wow, that actually makes a little sense. And though it may not fit, say, the Kenyan model, or maybe it could in certain circumstances, just like I've been 10 days in India where hunting has been banned since 1972, and I go and sit with the poorest of the poor, just like it would be in Kenya, and go, why are these people not allowed to derive a benefit somehow from the wildlife that is interacting with them, taking out their crops, taking out their livelihoods, killing their people? And yes, ecotourism is an option, but ecotourism is only in the famous reserves, like in the Amboseli ecosystem or in the Serengeti. And here in India was the big tiger reserves. And it is like, India is a completely, like, you kill a pig in India, you can go to jail for 12 years. Wow. And all they're doing is protecting their crops, and don't even eat the pig, right? Some of them don't even eat it because it's Hindu. Anyway, I say that all to say that I really enjoy opportunities like this, because I'm not going to press you about becoming a pro hunting advocate. I just want to just lay out the truth that I know.
Right.
And you come away from it going, wow, I never thought about it like that.
Fair enough. And I'm very open-minded. As I would hope you took away from our conversations.
Oh, absolutely.
And so,
absolutely.
I'm definitely keen to learn, but I do want to have a very open and respectful dialogue around this topic, controversial topic.
So, Fiona, talk to me about how, again, you were raised in Kenya, raised in a system that had no hunting. Was your viewpoint very much like hunting is bad?
So it's interesting because there's the hunting you're talking about, and then there's the hunting that I was exposed to, which is mostly trophy hunting. And I don't know if there's a huge difference, because it's definitely something I'm gonna ask. But so what I've been exposed to is trophy hunting, and I'm not behind that, because even with the animals that were being hunted, I would find that already they're endangered. Removing them from the ecosystem didn't make sense, and they've always, hunters have peddled conservation being the model behind their cause.
So in your mind, what do you think? You sort of, I think it's a good segue already. What is the difference when you think about the hunting I talked about and trophy hunting? What do you see as the difference? Or maybe an easier question is, why do you dislike trophy hunting?
It has no bearing in conservation, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, when you get your trophy, whether it's the tusks or the head of a lion, what are you doing to the species that you've left behind? I mean, we've seen the whole effect of Cecil, the lion. He was in his prime. So what was the conservation reasoning behind that hunting? I've seen canned hunting. I've been exposed to that. I've read about that. I've watched films about that. And so I feel like, and then coming from the African community, I know that we ourselves hunted in the early days, and our hunting was more for sustenance and cultural reasons. So it's just about finding that balance and what it is that the explanation behind the hunting in this time and in this day and age, basically. What are the benefits? And can we move away from that? So that for me is what I'm looking at or trying to understand.
I would say that the idea of trophy hunting has been bastardized. And it's been bastardized as a bad thing. Now, I will say that 90% of trophy hunting, and I always give percentages because I'm never like it's always good or always bad.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for the vast majority, and I'll say about 90% of trophy hunting is actually what you want it to be, which is conservation. And I'll explain why shortly.
Okay.
10% of trophy hunting is actually on face value and is in an activity has no bearing on conservation at all, period. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Like the canned hunting that you talked about, there's really no benefit. Somebody comes in, they pick a lion, they pick something, and they shoot it, and they take it home. There's no real benefit there. The only benefit, if you wanted to sort of look a little bit beyond that whole like motivation of that individual, is tied to somebody's getting a job. If it's a plains game animal that's being canned, that meat is being used somehow, somewhere. It's never being wasted. You know that, right? You live in Africa. The idea that somebody kills something in Africa, chops off its head, and leaves the body is just that never happens.
Okay.
So, but 90% of trophy hunting, in my opinion, is the reason why wildlife conservation in these hunting areas is doing so well. And here's why I say that. Trophy hunting as a moniker means that this individual, and again, you've got to take it's very difficult for you to do this, but you've got to remove the motivation of the individual of why they are there out of the picture. And Fiona, to be completely honest with you, very few people are going to Africa to hunt for conservation.
Okay.
Hear me for what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
They're going there to hunt because they like it. And they think, and it's fun for them, and it's an adventure for them, and they get to go to these cool places and meet cool people and see cool animals and do the thing that they love, which is to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
But the indirect benefit of that activity, the indirect consequence of that activity is conservation. And here's why I say that. In that trophy motivation, as this person's walking around a random piece of bush in Africa, what animal is he selecting or she selecting? They are often, again, I'm not going to say all the time, 90% of the time are going to pick a very old male.
Okay.
A male that is done. He's done his breeding. He's moved on from the herd. Is really, going to be in the last stages of his life. So when you think about a conservation of wildlife perspective as a paradigm, as a policy, writ large, how do you increase a wildlife population? Which is what conservation is, right? Conservation means I want to sustain wildlife and I want to increase wildlife. Would you agree with that statement?
But also preserve it.
But if you're sustaining it and increasing it, are you preserving it?
Yeah, technically, yes, you are.
Okay. Yes, you are. Because it's going to be there. Preserving is keeping something there for the future.
Exactly.
Right? So if you are ensuring the population stays the same or increases into the future, you're protecting it, you're conserving it, you're preserving it. So if you needed to do that, how do you do it? Which parts of the population do you protect to ensure that an animal's population is preserved, protected, and conserved?
The young.
The young, absolutely. The young breeding males, right? Unfortunately, you brought up Cecil. Unfortunately, sometimes a breeding male in his prime is taken. Should that happen? We hope it doesn't happen, but it sometimes does. Now, what happened from Cecil? Cecil started a movement in lion conservation, which is called an age-based quota. Now, if you look in Zambia, if you look in Niassa, it started in Niassa. If you look in the Selous, you look in all these places now, there's age-based lion quota for lions being taken. So lions are only now being taken at over 6 years old, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. Often those male lions are not with prides either. So by protecting the females, so nobody's hunting females, which is the reproductive engine of the population, right? By protecting the young, by protecting young males, by protecting the breeding males, and only targeting that male population that is done. Yeah, and again, they're not completely done. I'm never going to say they're never going to breed again, which is part of this elephant controversy on the Kenyan-Tanzanian border, is that Amboseli has good research that says that these old buggers that do get over the age of mortality, there's a very young age of mortality of male elephants in the Amboseli ecosystem. It's at like 41, 42 years of age. So once an elephant goes over that, they do have, based on the science that Amboseli has brought forward, that they do have a greater propensity for siring young elephants in that population. So it's a very unique system, that. But for the majority, most animals, when they hit, and humans, when they hit 70, 80, 90 years old, in those time frames of a male, they just want to be left alone. Like an old buffalo bull, an old sable bull, they just want to be left alone, and those are the animals that you take. So I say that all to say, as a philosophy, we don't call it trophy hunting, but hunting as a philosophy, by targeting that specific animal, just from a wildlife conservation perspective, has to be defined as wildlife conservation, as wildlife protection. I wouldn't call it preservation, because again, we belong to the philosophy of sustainable use. So a definition of conservation has use built into it, if you look at IUCN specifically. Some people say, well, you don't have to have use from a conservation perspective. Okay, but the animals are going to die anyway. I don't subscribe to the idea that take humans out completely, let animals do their thing. I think we have to be a part of it. Right. So anyway, I say that to say, that's my definition from a trophy hunting perspective. The other thing that you mentioned, which is really cool, is that you talked about cultural hunting, especially in Kenya. I read a book, and I'll have to go and find it, and I'll send you some pictures around it. There was a tribe in southern Kenya, and it was led by a guy in the late 1800s by, I think it's Moses Kutui or something like that. These guys were renowned elephant hunters with poison bow and arrows. And this tribe would cover themselves in elephant dung, and they would slip in, and they would actually get like underneath the elephant and shoot a poisoned arrow into those elephants. I won't ask you to guess, but those guys, do you know what elephants they targeted?
Elephants in their prime.
The biggest. Yeah. The biggest elephants with the biggest ivory. And why did they do that? It had no ecological consequence at all. It was mainly because the biggest elephants had the most meat.
Right.
And the biggest elephants had the biggest tusks that they could trade with the Arabs on the coast for beads and for all other things. It's fascinating. When you actually look at it and you start looking at, again, the bastardization of this term trophy hunting. And I've also heard people say it's a colonial term, right? That it's white people. And I said, well, no, technically the first trophy hunters were the tribes, because they recognized at the end of the day, a trophy is a value tied to someone, right? My trophy may be, for my family here, I want to kill the biggest, fattest female doe because I know it's going to feed my family the most. And that's the value for me. The value for, Moses Couture and his tribe was the most meat and the most ivory, because we get the most money from it, or we get the most trading value from it. So yeah, I hope that answered your question. It was a long answer to your question.
It kind of does. I do have a few rebuttals, but let's pin that to when
Go ahead.
do come to that topic, because I had a flow of questions that was going to help me get a
go
better
ahead.
understanding of this. First of all, I saw that, and you have mentioned that you grew up in South Africa, and now you're working in the US. So, having seen both African and Western views, what difference stand out for you when it comes to hunting? For instance, like you've spoken about, many African communities traditionally hunted for subsistence or cultural reasons, whereas Western have a propensity for big game hunting, which often entails, trophies. Have these contrasting perspectives shaped your own philosophy on what hunting should represent?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I think outside of America, there is a viewpoint that Americans are this like trophy hunting culture. And the reason being is that all you see is the traveling Western philosophy. You don't see the homegrown philosophy tied to hunting. And I would argue that here in America specifically, there's a vast majority of the population that is, I wouldn't call them subsistence hunters, but I would very much call them, blue-collared individuals that want to fill their freezers with meat because deer meat is very abundant and it's very good for you. And it's cheaper than going to the grocery store and buying cow meat or lamb meat or anything like that. So I think that there is some synergies between sort of, dare I say, like here I'm in Tennessee. I lived in Mississippi for 20 years. The redneck Mississippian, the rural country Mississippian, I think philosophically has very strong connections to like a rural person in Kenya, specifically as it comes to, figuring out where their meat's coming from.
Right.
Interestingly enough, America and South Africa have very strong wildlife conservation models. They're arguably like two of the best wildlife conservation models in the world. South Africa went from 500,000 head of wildlife in 1970 to almost 22 million head of wildlife today. You're like, holy smokes, that's a lot of wildlife. And why was the change? Why did something like that happen? Well, the reason it happened was because they went through a massive drought in the 70s. Sheep and cattle just could not last on the landscape. And they started looking around going, oh, that springbok's doing really well. That kudu's doing really well. What's going on here? And then somebody said, well, that kudu right there, I'll pay you $1,000 if I can come and shoot it. And you get to keep the meat. And you get to do whatever you want with the meat. Give it to the community, sell the meat. And they're like, wow, okay. Capitalistic thought process. I can do better. From a land use perspective, I focus on wildlife than I do on agriculture and livestock. And so that's what was born out of the 70s. And today, that is the value-driven wildlife economy that is South Africa.
Right.
But it's a very private model, Fiona. I.e., and that's the only reason why it did so well, is that, Fiona, if you had land and you put wildlife on your land and you fenced it, it belonged to you. And you decide what you want to do with it. Ecotourism, game management, game farming, hunting, combination of all of it. In America, it's the opposite. It's not a private model. it's a public model. It's a public resource model. And so they have taken the viewpoint of you need to the public, if the resource belongs to the public, the state manages the resource for the public. And so it's two very contrasting models that work equally well, but very different in their hunting philosophies. And there's also other things, like really unique things. Like here in America, they have very exclusive like governor's tags. So for instance, the only way I could equate it to South Africa, and again, it wouldn't work. Tanzania, it wouldn't work. Would be like the minister of Tanzania says, I'm putting an elephant tag up for auction for the entire country. And then somebody can hunt that elephant wherever, whenever they want. So it happens in America. So for instance, sheep, wild bighorn sheep. The New Mexico governor's tag for bighorn sheep just sold for $1.3 million for a sheep, Fiona.
Wow.
And so you're like, well, that's crazy.
It is.
You can buy a
So
sheep
wild.
tag for $200,000. So why did somebody pay $1.3 million? Well, one, they're looking for a tax write-off. Two, they're interested in wildlife conservation. They're interested in having more sheep on the landscape. And the way that system works is that tag that he got, all of that money gets pumped back into bighorn sheep conservation in New Mexico, in the state. So the guy literally just raised quadruple the amount of money that the sheep program typically has on an annual basis to do their work, to hunt one sheep. But that guy then gets to choose where he hunts, what he hunts, how he hunts, the whole kit and caboodle. Like, it's open 365 days a year. So it's a very privileged status. And some people don't like it because the model in America is that the resource belongs to the people. And you can't really pay for the model. You can't pay for the resource like you can in South Africa. That's a private model. You pay for that resource. So they think it's antithetical to the idea of wildlife conservation in America, but it also has its merits, as I just described, in terms of putting money back into conservation.
Right. So how would you say then those kind of the different models have shaped how blood origins operate, basically?
I think it just gives us an exceptional viewpoint of the world.
Right.
I think, like today, I told you before we got on here, I'm going to talk to a vegan farmer. And his whole philosophy is hunting is not conservation. But it's very limited to an American viewpoint. And, we see hunting in New Zealand, we see hunting in Australia, we see hunting in South Africa, in Tanzania, obviously not. And then in places that have hunting banned, India, Kenya, America, that have different systems. And so I think it allows us to have these kinds of conversations that we've been privy to. We've opened our viewpoint, our perspective to all these different models that happens around the world. And we can see the good in those models, and we can see the bad in those models.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so in terms of colonial legacy in hunting, the history of trophy hunting in Africa is definitely intertwined with colonialism. You think back of colonial era of safaris where outsiders claim big game drives, big game trophies. So how would you reckon with that legacy today? Do you see modern hunting culture taking steps to break away from those colonial era attitudes and involve local African communities more, or does the shadow of colonial exploitation still hang over international hunting expeditions from your experience or blood origins?
yes, I completely acknowledge that there is disparities. I think that there is moves afoot everywhere to try as best as possible to get equality put into ownership of wildlife and trackers becoming professional hunters and professional hunters being of color, everywhere, all across Africa. I think the toughest hurdle, Fiona, is, I think, unfortunately, because of a legacy, as you mentioned, of sort of colonialism and hunting being seen. I think this is important. Hunting being seen, or wildlife management being seen specifically as like a colonial white thing. Even though people are like, okay, we need to have more representation of race in the various folds of wildlife management, I think maybe there's a stigma that that's not what we do, that's not what we want to do. I'm not saying that's the case all across the board, because I see things changing in South Africa. I see black professional hunters coming through the systems. I see black owners now coming through the systems. I see the same thing in wildlife veterinarian work, right? For instance, Mozambique Conservation Alliance, the guys there, I don't think you'll see a white face in their team. And they're all vets, which is amazing to see, right? They're really, really good guys. I think people recognize that. And I think people want to change. There's also just, a massive hurdle to get over, which is 30 years or 40 years of that just being not something we do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a tough question. And I don't know if it's changing quick enough. If there's enough opportunity. I do know that there's lots of people giving opportunities, opening opportunities as much as they possibly can.
Fair enough. Sorry to put you in this
No.
spot.
It's a great question. And I love the fact that this is my podcast. I'm supposed to be asking you questions, and you're asking me questions.
Well, I did get in. I remember us having this conversation, and it's something I'm definitely curious about. So I really wanted to use this platform to ask.
And I think it takes time too, right? It doesn't, especially in the field. I'll give you an example that a lot of people may not know of. When you look at professional hunting across Africa, the gold star standard for professional hunting is the Zimbabwe Professional Guide.
Okay.
And I say that very specifically. Zimbabwe Professional Guide is the highest standard of guiding in Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe does not differentiate between a professional hunter and an ecotourism guide. They are the same person when they finish their exam. Okay? Here are things that you don't realize that I think you would want somebody in the ecotourism space to be proficient in. Mm-hmm. In Zimbabwe, it takes you about 4 years to become qualified.
Wow.
Okay, you have to do apprenticeships, you have to do a number of hours, and the guides and professional hunters have to do the same things. And when I mean the same things, I mean the same things, i.e., in their experience as they move forward, they all have to kill elephant.
Wow.
They all have to kill buffalo. They all have to, not all, the professional hunter side has to kill a cat, lion, and or leopard. Now, they're not hunting them for trophies. These are all problem animals that they're taking care of in rural communities. So they use the training opportunities for these guides to go in and help the people of Zimbabwe. Now, you're like, whoa, holy shit, I can't believe that an ecotourism guide has to kill an elephant. That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. If you decide to take a walk, a safari walk, with a safari guide in an area, would you prefer to know that safari guide knows what to do when the shit hits the ceiling fan and an elephant charges in, or not?
That's a tough question, because I've always asked myself this in terms of walking safaris. In my opinion, and I'll be very honest, I will bear the brunt of losing my life if it means.
Oh, no, you wouldn't, Fiona.
Yes,
no,
I would.
You
and
wouldn't.
This is how I see it. The wild is wildlife's home, right? It's like asking me if someone came into my home and threatened me, what's my duty? Is it to defend myself, or is it to lay over because they came with good intentions? I defend myself, right? And the same for an animal. There's no proof that animals, at least during these walking safaris, act out of malice. It's definitely a reaction, whether it's feeling threatened or defending their territory, but it's always it's from a pure place. So for a guide, for me, I would tell my guide, first and foremost, do not take the life of this animal. You're free to
Kenya, there's that would be so tough for him, Fiona. Like, if you tell him, look, if an elephant charges, let him kill me, he's like, oh, hell no, because I'd lose my job.
Don't kill the animal. And I think I've seen alternatives to having animals or repelling animals that didn't have to come to ending their life. And it's something that's practiced in Kenya, so it would be wild for me to just stand there and watch an animal being shot in because they're protecting me and I'm the one who stepped into their home. Yeah, so it's been my view for a long time. It's not something I'm just coming up with right now. It's something I've definitely thought about, and that's my stance on it.
Yeah, look, kudos to you, because I wouldn't lose my life. I would want my guide, and again, this is an absolutely rare case, exceptional circumstance that's hope never ever ever happens, and the guides are taught never to put themselves in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
But you never say never.
Yeah.
And in the situation where an elephant or something, you surprise an old buffalo, it just happens to be there, old cantankerous curmudgeon, who's like, fuck you guys, you woke me up from my sleep, I'm coming to kill you. I want that guy to know how to kill that buffalo and have done it. Take care of that and and protect me. So all power to you. You're gonna let the buffalo take you.
I mean, we didn't talk about buffaloes. Like, that's my greatest fear. But yeah, it's definitely general in animals, and I would hope that the guide would know how to not surprise an animal in the wild, so that we're not in that scenario at all. But yeah, also, you don't put yourself in situations where an animal has to lose their life or what. That's how I approach. Have respect for wild spaces, wild habitats, and wildlife in general. That's it. So that none of you have to lose your lives. Period.
So I say that all to say ZPGA is doing such a great job. There is, from an equality perspective, everyone, it's an equal playing field, right? The tests are so hard.
Yeah.
That everyone just goes through, and there's amazing black professional hunters, amazing black guides, amazing white rangers, white guide. To me, ZPGA again is the gold star standard. It's like you just have to be the best of the best, because that's what we demand.
Yeah, I mean, it's scary that there'd be enough problem animals for all the guides that are taking this test to be able to shoot down.
Well, they
That for
don't.
me is
That's what you don't. There may be 400 people that take the entry exam.
uh-huh.
By the time that 400 class finishes, there's only like 8 of them left.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's
So
so
it's
hard.
a very okay.
And the shooting requirements are so, like, the testing is so rigorous because Zimbabwe, tourism is it.
Right.
Like, tourism is their currency. And so they want to make sure that their guides are the best of the best.
Okay. Well, that's good, and then it's something I've learned for sure today. So that's really cool. So to my other question, so in an age of lab-grown meat, wildlife photography, safaris, and increasing concern for animal welfare, as you heard me say, some would argue that hunting is an outdated practice, right? What would you say to people who claim there's no longer any need to hunt in modern society? You believe hunting still serves a valuable purpose, whether culturally or scientifically, that can't be met by alternatives like ecotourism, which you've mentioned, or controlled culling by authorities, or like wildlife conservation.
Yeah, sheesh, you asked a lot there. A lot of things to go through. So let me just quickly hit a couple. Lab-grown meat. I'd prefer to eat real meat than multiple different chemicals. Yes, you can do it. Doesn't mean it's good for you. All right?
But it is an age that we live in, you know.
It is an age we live in, but I wouldn't say that it's good for humans. I wouldn't say that it's scalable for every human on the planet. I don't think it would be good for the environment either. And the fact you don't know what you're actually eating is one of the biggest problems. 2, from a necessity of hunting today, you're absolutely right. You don't have to hunt today. That's why we have grocery stores. That's why we have meat. But if you're not okay with hunting, you've got to be okay with the animal the sort of the animal industry, right? The animal in the complex, which is lots of animals being grown in confined spaces for human consumption. You have to be okay with that. And if you're okay with that, in terms of random meat showing up in a random grocery store that you have no idea where the meat came from, you don't know how the animal lived, you don't know the standards that the animal lived in, you don't know how it died, you don't know the hands that touched that meat, you can't be against hunting. You can't, because of the ethics tied to it. Because the meat that I hunt, I know everything about that animal, Fiona. Everything. I know how old it was. I know how it lived. I know where it lived. I know that it had every day of its life that was happy until the last day that it had one bad day. And its life got extinguished extremely quickly and as ethically as possible. Then I know exactly who touched the meat. I know who processed the meat. I know everything about it. So to me, when somebody goes hunting is irrelevant nowadays because you can go get your food from the grocery store, I say that's a little hypocritical.
Well, that would be coming from, again, an American perspective, because in Africa, we don't think of stuff like that. Our cows are free grazing, right? They're not confined in spaces. They're not fed chemicals. So we don't have that, I guess, luxury.
Same
of being
situation though.
vegan.
Same situation. Go to you're in Nairobi right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you went down to your grocery store right now and you bought beef that is packaged in your grocery store, what do you know about that beef?
I know it's
Nothing.
not hunted.
Yeah, but what's the difference between killed and hunted?
I guess for me, I'm looking at wildlife versus domestic. I don't know of anyone who hunts cows in Africa.
What's
or
the
Kenya.
difference though? What's the difference? They're both dying.
Yes, but one Has died for, I don't know. I mean, there's no
No, you're getting
logical.
onto something. You're getting something very. So no, you actually. I'll help you put the point to what you're trying to say. One died for human consumption.
Exactly.
One died for fun. Is what you wanted to say, right?
Precisely.
But the meat is still being used the same way, and I would argue that the hunted meat is more. If we wanted to take a step back, has more ties to animal welfare than the meat in your grocery store. And here's why I say it. Animal welfare is what? Animal welfare is a thought process that is, we want to make sure everything tied to an animal is the best it can be. Agreed?
Agreed.
So a hunted animal, free range, right? Has very little human interaction, no hormones, no antibiotics, no crawled, not pushed around, lived out its until, probably very old age, died to a single bullet. Okay? I think that's pretty good from an animal welfare perspective.
Fair enough. That is a fair argument, because even as you're saying that, I was trying to say, is it, for me, is the issue the bullet? And is it because, even Native Americans would hunt with bows and arrows? Is that more humane? What constitutes humanely dying? So that is a good argument from you, and
Yeah.
I will accept that.
No,
answer.
and I appreciate you saying that. I think the sticking point here is what I helped you with is there's somehow, some reason, there's a connotation that an animal dying for fun is wrong.
Yeah. It's still
That's
hard
it, right?
to wrap it definitely is hard to wrap my head around that, why, and what does that say about someone who's having fun from seeing an animal die,
So let me ask this question.
versus...
Is there a difference if I go out and hunt an impala? Okay, I'm the same individual. I go out because I'm looking forward to hunting an impala. I think it's going to be fun. I go through the hunt. I kill an impala. It was amazing. My motivation to go out to do that was because it was going to be an adventure and it was fun.
Yeah.
That impala got taken. The meat got distributed to the local community. I was very grateful for it. They don't really have a protein source. This is a scenario. Or my job was to go out to kill an impala for the community for its meat. I did the same thing.
Yeah.
But the motivation of me going was different. Is there a difference in your mind now?
So you're saying, in short, the end justifies the means?
Correct. I'm saying that the consequence, not the end, the consequence at the end of the day, because I can't change people's motivations, Fiona.
Yeah.
I can't change somebody, like I started this conversation, I can't change somebody to say, I want all of you white hunters in America, I want you to go to Africa to hunt purely because you are for conservation.
Right.
I can't change their minds.
Yeah.
And so if I can't change their minds, I'm like, okay, what is the result? What is the consequence of you doing what you're doing in your mind is for fun? So that example with the impala, the consequence of the action is people are being fed that need to be fed. Isn't that what
Yeah.
we should just be about?
Feeding the community.
As an example,
Yeah.
right?
No, I
I'll give
hear
you an
you. I
example.
hear you.
Yeah.
I'll counter and give an example from my own community. We hunted being the operative word, lions as part of a rite of passage, right? For a
Young
man to
Maasai
become,
boys, right?
yes, to become a
Yeah.
Moran, right? One would argue they'd be having fun as much as there were dangerous connotations to it. There was adventure, there was fun still, it's a group of young men gathering to take on this formidable beast. So at the end of the day, did their having fun make it inhumane? And it was something that was taking place during rituals. It's not something that they'd wake up and decide to just hunt lions. And I've seen how that's been skewed by tons of these films that have come out to talk about Maasai and stuff. And so you bring a good point. Does having fun make it any less humane, or what? Basically, I get your point. Is what I'm saying.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And that's the toughest hurdle to get over at the end of the day. And really part of the conversation we've been having, the toughest hurdle is somebody getting beyond the cloud of someone, whoever that is, enjoying, and here's the crux, enjoying killing an animal.
Yeah.
See, your face even just like nailed it right there.
Yeah, enjoying is such a heavy word. I mean, yeah.
But it's not actually enjoying the kill. That's the thing that, again, it's so difficult to describe if you've never done it. It's not, because here's the whole, there's so many sort of complex paradigms built into hunting.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody goes, oh, you guys enjoy killing, you love the bloodlust, I'm like, not really, because if that was the case, then we would go volunteer our services at the abattoir and kill as much as we want.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also failure built into hunting. And so if there's failure built into hunting, then there must be something else that we love, that we enjoy, that is exciting to us. And if we are successful and we do kill something, what's funny is it's almost, it is anticlimactic, because the hunt is over when you kill something. And so it's just again, I'm struggling with it because it's so difficult to talk about, because I don't do it. I enjoy hunting. Here's the difference. I enjoy hunting. What is hunting? Hunting is the adventure. It's seeing new places. It's spending 56 hours in aeroplanes to get to this random place in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the world, that nobody's ever been to. Meeting cool people that have never seen a white man before, who want to sit around and give you tea around a fire that nobody has sat around before. For an opportunity to potentially kill something.
Okay, so hunting is more than just the act, right? It's the whole experience, basically.
100%. That is what hunting is. It's this, and say, if you would, the response to me could be, well, Robbie, you can do that without hunting. You could
Without
go do that without killing something. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, well, then I wouldn't have gone.
Right. Fair enough.
To your question about ecotourism, like the last piece of your question, like, why can't ecotourism be the savior for everything? Well, number one, I don't think that there's enough places in the world that would have enough volume of people to go do ecotourism. So I saw a survey once of students, and they said, list the top, if you had to go to a place to do ecotourism, list the places. 97 out of 100 people listed Okavango Delta, Serengeti, and Kruger National Park. That was it. And so you've left with 5% of the world. If you extrapolate that out, 5% of the rest of the ecotourism gets split between everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
That may be a large percentage sort of skewed through that survey. But there's a lot of competition for ecotourism, and they typically want to go to places that you can see the big five very quickly, get in, get out, 2 days, 3 days, get in, get out. So a place that I go to that takes 56 hours to get to, that is incredibly difficult to get to, and then the density of wildlife is so low that you hardly ever see anything. Nobody's going to go there. No ecotourist will go there. And ecotourism is a volume business, Fiona, right? So there's lots of studies. Timbavati in Namibia is you need like 66 ecotourism people to cover the cost of one hunter. So these places in rural Africa can operate and survive and protect the habitat and protect the wildlife and employ people with very few people coming to do the activity, which is hunting. You only need 10 hunters to go into the middle of the Congo to protect the Congo because they're willing to spend $100,000 to go there.
Right.
Versus 1,000 tourists, or 660 tourists spending, 10 grand at a time and spending 2 or 3 days at a time and flying in, flying out. And, we need to have an entire other podcast to talk about the idea that non-consumptive ecotourism is actually consumptive when you talk about carbon footprints, water footprints, all of those kinds of things.
Fair. And so I want to unpin what we pinned in the beginning, the talk about hunting versus trophy hunting. First of all, I really want to, from your point of view, understand if there is a difference. And, coming from Kenya, it's definitely a country that's embraced alternative conservation models, right? And we firmly stand against specifically trophy hunting, labeling it obviously outdated and even a form of neocolonialism, like you talked about. What would you say is the difference between ethical hunting and trophy hunting, and what safeguards exist, or do you believe should exist to ensure that hunting truly targets conservation rather than perpetuate exploitation?
Yeah, I think I've already answered the question. I think trophy hunting is ethical for the vast majority of its time, right?
Right.
I think there's going to be bad apples in every barrel. Ecotourism has bad apples, right? Ecotourism is not the be-all and end-all. There's bad operators in ecotourism circles. And I think the same thing applies in hunting circles. You have bad operators. And those bad operators, unfortunately, give the whole industry a bad rap because it's tied to killing animals.
Right.
You don't have a bad operator in the ecotourism world put a bad smell on the whole ecotourism country, right? Ecotourism industry. Because there's no the only way that they would do it is if they ran over a lion, say in the Serengeti, because they were racing to get there or something like that. That's the difference. And the same model happens the same way. If there's a bad operator in ecotourism, why is he a bad operator or she's a bad operator? It's likely because money is involved. Right? Same thing as hunting. Bad apples, bad operators, getting influenced by money, being influenced by, some sort of greed. That's it. So to me, that's the whole point of what I do every single day. Yeah. And people have pointed it out on Facebook. They're like, why aren't you talking about this bad operator? I said, because nobody's talking about the 90% that are good.
Right.
I'm going to talk about the 90% that are good and not focus on the one that is bad or the two that are bad. Let's talk about the good guys. Let's talk about all the good things that happen because of hunting. Let's talk about the communities that are benefiting hand over mouth because of hunting. The wildlife that is benefiting, the people that are benefiting, the education that is being provided, and people getting, you talk about like breaking neo-colonial circles. I got example after example of people giving opportunities because of hunting that are now uber successful. Like, I'm going into South Africa at the end of March to tell a story of a kid that had extreme potential, got to the university level and just could not survive financially. And hunters stepped up and said, we want to help you. And is now one of the most accomplished architects in Port Elizabeth. Coming out of a very, very rural place.
Mm-hmm.
And because he succeeded, there's now half a dozen of him that have come through the ranks that are now becoming uber successful. Fuck, it's so amazing.
Yeah. So what kind of safeguards would you recommend so that these bad apples are not getting as much PR as they do, and we're talking about the good apples? Because
I
to be
think we've
honest,
already talked. Yeah, go ahead.
It's because there are these opportunities to break ranks that allow them to be able to exploit the system and give a bad name to hunting. So what kind of safeguards do you think should be put in place?
No, I think the safeguards are in place. I think that we have laws, we have regulations, we have quotas, we have science-based monitoring of our wildlife populations to ensure that you're not over-harvesting. Does that sometimes happen? Yes. But I think people I think specifically hunters and hunting operators realize that, they're in it for the long game. For instance, I'll give you an idea. Tanzania. One of the things that the finger was pointed at Tanzania that didn't benefit hunting or didn't benefit wildlife is that concession leases were given for 5 years at a time.
Mm-hmm.
If you were a businessman, Fiona, and went into a concession knowing that you've only got 5 years, and in 5 years' time, after all of your investment in that concession, it was going to go up for tender again and you could lose it, what would you do? I know what I would do.
Please tell us, please.
I would rape the system.
Okay.
Right? I'm a businessman. You're a businesswoman. We would go in there and we'd make as much money as we could in the 5 years that we had it.
Right.
And then we'd get out. Because we could lose it. That's what used to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in terms of safeguards, we talked about safeguards. There was, they had quota, but they would, go over quota and stuff like that. Not that it happened all the time. But today, those concessions are 10-year leases, 15-year leases, 20-year leases. Now they are like, no, we want to invest and we want to think about sustainability because we have to. Wildlife is an economic asset to hunting. And here's the other thing that I think is a good takeaway for people and you to think about. People say hunting is not conservation. But if you look at it from a pure economics perspective, does a hunter and hunting operator want more wildlife on the ground or less wildlife on the ground?
More?
More, of course. Because it means that there's more economic asset out there that's constantly growing. It's like your bank account. You want your bank account to grow. You want wildlife to grow as well. These hunting operators want wildlife to grow as well, so that they have quota in the future to sell, to make money, to put back into anti-poaching, to put back into the communities. It's just this amazing circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like to think of it like that a lot. Like people, you got to think of these places like a small economy, and you want your economic assets to grow and to sustain themselves over time. So laws, regulations, policies, these things like concession lengths of time, the age-based quota that we talked about for lions, all of these things are in place everywhere.
Yeah.
That safeguards wildlife, that safeguards the industry.
Okay. So speaking of science, there's definitely an intense debate in conservation science about whether hunting helps or harms wildlife. Supporters point out that regulated hunting can fund conservation and control overpopulation, and poor oversight have led to declines. That's what critics say. From your experience and research, what does the science say? And is hunting effective as a conservation tool? And how does Blood Origins approach the nuance of hunting? The nuance that hunting is sometimes beneficial and not really a silver bullet.
I would say that hunting is not the panacea of wildlife conservation. It's not the be-all and end-all of it.
Yeah.
I think that today, when you look at land use, I like to use this. When you look at land use across the world, what land use is positive and promotes wildlife, Fiona? Out of a percentage of 100% of land use across the world, how much percentage do you think is pro-habitat, pro-wildlife?
Percentage-wise?
Yeah.
Maybe 80%?
The opposite.
20%.
I would say 8%.
Wow.
Why do you think we have this whole like push for 30 for 30? Have you heard of 30 for 30?
No, I haven't.
30 for 30 is protecting 30% of the land by 2030 all around the world. Why do you think we have that? Because a lot of people recognize that we don't have much land right now set aside for habitat and wildlife.
Right.
When you look across the world, there's probably 8% of the land, 9% of the land dedicated specifically for wildlife or habitat or whatnot, or have positive benefits and consequences to wildlife and habitat. When you break that 8% out, what are the things that are pro-wildlife and pro-habitat? Some agricultural systems, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wilderness areas like your jungles, your mountains, your massive taiga areas in Russia, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You've got your philanthropic model, right? The people who go in and spend money philanthropically to protect areas. You've got your carbon credit systems, your biodiversity credit systems. So now I'm at 4. Okay. Ecotourism, 5. National parks, state parks, whatever, 6. Mm-hmm. And hunting, 7. Anything else that you can think that's pro-wildlife and habitat?
I guess the conservancies fit into the national parks.
Yeah, state parks, national parks. Yep. So 7, there's only 7 things in the world that are pro-wildlife and pro-habitat. So whenever somebody says we want to get rid of hunting, or science that says hunting is not good, I'm like, why would you throw out a tool, one of the few tools that we have for this thing that we all think is necessary, which is protecting wildlife and protecting habitat? Now, again, when science says that hunting is not good, or as you say, sometimes is beneficial, nothing is perfect. Ecotourism is not perfect either. Mm-hmm. Right? Hunting isn't perfect. Hunting doesn't have to happen everywhere, but there's a lot of places. Again, I would say the vast majority, 80% of areas that people hunt, 90% of areas that people hunt, there is no doubt is good for protecting habitat, for increasing wildlife, and helping people. Tell me what's bad about those 3 things. And I don't need science. I'm a scientist. I don't need science to say, or scientific peer-reviewed study to tell me that Mozambique in Qatada 11, hunters went in and put 20 lions in 4 years ago. There's 105 lions today. I don't need a science peer-reviewed paper to tell me that that's good.
Right.
And I've got example like that after example after example after example. Now, are there examples out there that hunting was not good? Yes. Okay. We're not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a piece of science that came out of Zambia in I don't think it was the Kafui system, maybe it was the Luanga system, that showed that hunting was detrimental to lion populations and a moratorium had to be put in place, that then after the moratorium lion populations increased? 100%. The hunting operators should have recognized that before the moratorium got put in place and put a moratorium on themselves.
Right.
And so you don't have the population to continue hunting the way that you are. Your economic asset is declining. Stop. So I think that a lot of people expect hunting to be this like absolute perfect thing. And by human nature, it cannot be.
Right. Good. Well, that's a very good point. And so now for me, coming from a background of filmmaking, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions in regards to films. As a filmmaker, I'd call you that, and storyteller with blood origins. You're portraying arguably a very controversial subject, right?
Yeah.
What responsibilities do you feel in depicting hunting in a fair and truthful way? How do you ensure that your content doesn't glorify unethical behavior, or on the flip side, gloss over the real conflicts and emotions involved in hunting? And are there any examples that you can give me about any of your work that perhaps changed the preconceived notions about hunters and brought a nuance to the public debate?
Yeah, I think that we don't focus on the act of hunting. Okay. This whole conversation's been about the benefits, consequence, and impacts of the activity of hunting. And I feel like that nobody has focused on that. And that's what we focus on. And I think from a storytelling perspective, from a filmmaking perspective, what's the most powerful story that you can tell in that world is the story of someone.
Yeah.
A person's story, the people's story. And that's what we love to focus on. And I think that's a very powerful tool, because it's very difficult. We've got a piece coming out that I literally just finished 4 days ago about an elephant documentary out of Botswana. The benefits of elephant hunting to people in Botswana. And, we got to spend some time in front of her. She said she was 20. She looked 16 in a rural mud hut in the middle of nowhere. And her dad had been trampled by an elephant. Dead. And it's like, holy shit, how do you I had the privilege of telling this girl's story to the world. That this is the circumstance that she lives in. A Western voice, a Kenyan voice saying, it's bad, don't hunt elephants. And I hate to do this, but I'm going to, because you did say, I'd prefer to die than an elephant dying. Well, put yourself in this lady's circumstance. This is a mud hut in the middle of nowhere with 6 little kids running around and chickens running around. You're like, whose kids are these? Are they the dad's? Are they hers? We don't know. And she has nothing. He was the breadwinner. She has nothing. Or the old lady who goes to the elephant carcass after a trophy hunter. I'll say that specifically. A trophy hunter or a hunter has come in and taken an elephant in Botswana and uses the meat and is industrious and entrepreneurial and takes the meat and dries the meat and sells the meat for her now to afford education for her 6 daughters to go to Mount and go and be in school. That without that elephant hunting, that's not even possible. There is no employment. This woman would not have an opportunity to do it. Plus feed her family at the same time. It's just, and those are 2 examples. And I get all the time, I get the privilege of being behind the lens, listening to this, number one. And then I get the privilege of showing the world, telling the world these stories.
Right. Yeah. Well, that I do agree that that's definitely something that I've come across. The tragedies of elephant conflict in Botswana, and I think storytelling is a powerful tool in I guess explaining the nuance of what it means to be on the receiving end of being trampled, or at least being affected by an elephant, and then also not necessarily glorifying hunting, but explaining it, making people understand why is it that there's this quota or concession towards hunting. So I would say I would definitely agree in terms of storytelling. It does have that power. But then with the rise of digital media, filmmakers now have unprecedented power to shape public debate. So what, in your view, are responsibilities by storytellers when portraying hunting and conservation, ensuring that our work is not neither overly sanitized nor unjustly demonizing?
No, it's a great one. And I think I am constantly wary of falling into the trap, and I hate to say it this way, of not being truthful, because I think that the anti-hunting establishment is not truthful, and they use that a lot in the digital media space to amplify their voice. We're not going to mention her name, but we talked about a certain individual in South Africa together, and I think she is so vitriolic, and she uses that line of vitriol to amplify her voice, and it doesn't matter what is said. There's no consideration for logic. There's no consideration for truth. There's no consideration of anything but my opinion in a very vitriolic way. And I do not want to step into that stream of talking at all. And that's what we need to be careful of.
Yeah, absolutely. But it is a powerful tool, right? It can amplify your message, as you so rightfully put. So how do you use your platform to, I guess, demystify this?
Yeah, I think we use
that I've been told.
Yeah, I love to take people for what they say and debunk them. But we debunk it in a very respectful, gentlemanly method. And we say, you said this, let's deconstruct this. Like, for instance, the Botswana just released a press release by the Center for Humane Economy out of America saying, we want to translocate elephants out of Botswana because they're imperiled. Angola is a safe haven, and we want to promote ecotourism over hunting. Well, number one, imperiled suggests that they're in trouble. They're in danger. There's 132,000 elephants in a 28% area of the Khaza survey in Botswana. Probably 150,000 elephants in Botswana. No shape or form is that imperiled. Number two, Angola is a safe haven over Botswana. Wildlife poaching's through the roof. There's mines. There's there's no infrastructure. How can Angola be a safe haven over Botswana? And number three, by saying you're promoting ecotourism over hunting, is you're pitting them against each other. They work in harmony together. In Botswana, like in Kenya and Tanzania, there's areas that should never be hunted. Where you've got permanent water, great wildlife viewing. Ecotourism is it. That is the tool that needs to be used. But right next door to it, where you've got 400 miles of nothing but bush, of the same bush, that all that's in there are a couple of zebra, a couple of wildebeest, lots of elephant, and a steenbok. No ecotourist is going in there. So how do we use that area to the value for the people, for wildlife, for habitat? Hunting is a great tool for that area.
Okay. Well, speaking of debunking, what are some of the myths or misconceptions that you've come across either personally or with your organization, that you would like to, again, debunk for the greater public to have a better understanding, especially when it comes to hunting or hunters?
I think we've talked about a couple of them already. That hunting is not conservation, is something we constantly debunk. And I think that I've given numerous examples in this hour and a half to tell somebody that actually it is.
Mm-hmm.
Again, go back to the original definition of what conservation is. It is. That when an animal is hunted, that it's just like the head is cut off and that's the whole reason why somebody hunts. No, that's not it. Everything is used in most parts of the world. And I think a lot of what we do is, and again, this comes from me and the voice that we bring forward, is that you may have a certain connotation of who a hunter is and how they're supposed to act and how they're supposed to speak. And I hope that I demystify or change that opinion of you around a hunter through me.
I mean, you've certainly helped me look or recognize the nuances of hunting, especially coming from a community that has been vilified for our practices. I really do come to such conversations with an open mind and readiness to have dialogue. So if anything has happened, that's definitely been helpful in our conversation.
Perfect.
But finally, now living in this, looking ahead, with younger generations being more urbanized and often more critical of blood sports, what do you see as a future of hunting? Do you think hunting will still have a place in conservation and culture 50 years from now? And how might hunters and organizations like Blood Origins need to evolve to keep hunting relevant, ethical, and socially acceptable in a world that's rapidly changing?
I think hunting has to survive. If we as a society, regardless of what you think about hunting, if we as a society want to champion habitat protection and wildlife being around for your kids, my kids, our grandkids one day, and you recognize that the world today is no longer a sea of habitat with islands of humanity, but rather a sea of humanity with islands of habitat, why would you get rid of a tool that is protecting one of those islands? Humanity is only going to get bigger and bigger, and the pressures on wildlife and habitat is only getting bigger and bigger. So why would you remove a tool in your toolbox that is helping to protect habitat and wildlife for the next 50 years? And I'll be a little stronger in my words. Take it one step further. If you are against that tool, then I would argue that you are anti-wildlife conservation.
Bold statement.
Because again, people are very quick to talk about, ban this, ban that, and that's why we're allowed to have these kinds of conversations. I said, whoa. Let's start the baseline here and understand what your definition of wildlife conservation is. Stop right there. Let's just answer that question. Because if you answer it the way that I think you're going to answer it, that's what I'm doing. So you just don't agree with the method.
Right.
That's it. You don't agree with the tool. But you agree with, coming back to what we've been talking about, but you agree with the outcome. You agree on the consequence. So if the outcome and the consequence of you and me are the same.
Then the tool
What are we
shouldn't
talking
matter.
about here? What are we talking about here? Now, people will get into this whole anyway, I won't get into it, but I won't get into it. But to me, it's just, there's some asinine discussion points in there that people bring up, and they're just irrelevant. I'll just say it. Some people are like, well, if child rape was your tool to, decrease a population, would you still be for it if we were for decrease? And I said, what? I've had these kinds of, I said, what?
Huh.
Like, what are you talking about? Or it's just, that's a hypothetical, crazy, comparison. Anyway. So, Fiona, you're amazing, man. Thank you for the questions. Jeepers creepers, we need to do part 2 when we I honestly think we'll do part 2. How about this? We'll do part 2 and we'll talk specifically about like all the things that I've found out about the Kenyan, Tanzanian elephant thing.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. And maybe hopefully part 2 can be in person, but we'll see.
For sure.
Yeah.
Or part 3, for sure.
But exactly, because again, this was my way of parlaying this conversation into the festival, because I really think it's important that as conservationists and as storytellers, we look at these topics not as a way of trying to impose opinions, but open the forum for different opinions and welcome, the end goal, which is conservation. So
and look, today was, you didn't send me your questions.
Exactly, I did not.
I just answered them, and that's what I would love, to be at your film festival on stage with a microphone and people from the audience ask the questions that you just asked. And
Right.
I answered them the same way. Super honestly, super authentically. And again, at the end of the day, what I love is that people are going to see me as the hunter and be like, whoa, I didn't think a hunter spoke like that.
Well, I'll tell you what, when I met you and learned that you are a hunter, it definitely debunked a lot of things that I thought hunters would speak like or act like, to be honest. So you've done a good job in that respect. And I applaud you, honestly, for the work that you are doing, Robbie. I think that I think the way you approach this topic is very grounding and very accommodating of people who don't come from the same background and may have their own skepticism or apprehension towards the subject matter. And the fact that we are having this forum to learn from each other's points of view is just the step that we need towards understanding and having a more embracing world, which is what we need at the end of the day. So, yeah,
Thank you, Fiona.
I'm excited for possible opportunities. And do you envision like working with organizations from parts of this world that are not pro hunting, but are there like synergies that you think could exist where you could work with people?
Dude, I would, if you had to ask me like, what is my absolute goal, would be to find like, this is a little extreme, but is to find an anti-hunting organization and say, let's partner and do a wildlife conservation project together. Let's
awesome.
do something awesome together.
Yeah.
But I don't think an anti-hunting organization would do it, because there's politics involved and there's money involved of them being seen to be associated with a hunting organization. I need to find an organization that is more middle of the road, that's willing to take a little bit of a risk to say, no, we're pro-wildlife, regardless of the tool. And let's partner with these guys.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, and I think conversations are a great start. You're not going to find anyone who's going to change their mind simply from seeing what you've done and being converted immediately. They need to have this kind of dialogues and examine their point of view and see, okay, we have differing tools, but the end goal is the same, so why not work together? And
Yep.
in that respect, I'm, as someone who's definitely anti-hunting, I'm very open to working with you.
Sweet.
And look forward to that.
Well, when is your film festival this year?
It is next year in May.
Oh, that's right. It's next year. That's next year. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, Fiona. Well, appreciate you.
Yeah, same here, Robbie. Thank you so much for your time and answering the questions. And I look forward to part 2 and 3.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, you have a great rest of